In today's gospel text, after employing divine power in the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus makes the disciples get into a boat and head out across the sea. After the disciples leave, Jesus is finally alone. On a mountainside, he spends concentrated time in prayer with his Heavenly Father throughout the evening and into the night. While Jesus is alone on the mountain in prayer, the disciples are having a difficult time trying to cross the Sea of Galilee. A storm blows up, and Jesus doesn't wait for them to get to the other side. He comes to them, walking across the water. Naturally, this took the disciples by surprise. At first, the disciples mistake Jesus for a ghost. He reassured them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." As Jesus gets closer, Peter says to him, "Lord, if it is you, bid me come to you on the water." He stepped out of the boat and walked toward Jesus. But he soon lost focus, became aware of the dangerous and humanly impossible circumstance he was in, and started sinking. He cried out, "Lord, save me!" And Jesus lovingly rescued him. Jesus and Peter get into the boat. The wind ceases. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." In today's text, Jesus is telling us that when we are struggling, when we are adrift and far from shore, when the wind is against us, he is with us. Have faith. We are never alone. In the midst of the darkness which surrounds us, the storm with the howling wind, we know that if we face the wind, Jesus will be at our back. And when we turn around, we can hear his voice. In turning to him, the howl of the wind will never overwhelm him, and we can hear him. "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And if we have the faith, or at least have the courage to suspend our nagging disbelief, he will come to us, cutting through every trouble you can imagine. In a troubled marriage, with your career in shambles, in illness, bereavement, depression, despair, coronavirus, Jesus comes to us through the storm. Fred Craddock writes, "On a dark night of fear and helplessness, Christ comes to his disciples. Storms will blow up in all of our lives, but Jesus has not left us alone. The one who calms the storms and makes the winds to cease is still with us. He still has work for us to do. There are plenty of adventures ahead, and Jesus will bid us follow. And he will say to us in the midst of any storm, "Take heart, it is I, don't be afraid." We may never be in such a position as Peter was, but we can learn from him. As Barbara Brown Taylor says, we are all just like Peter. We obey and we fear. We walk and we sink. We believe and we doubt. Our faith and our doubt exist in us at the same time, buoying us up and bearing us down, giving us courage and feeding our fears, supporting our weight on the wild seas of our lives, and sinking us like stones. But that is exactly why we need Jesus Christ. Because think about it. What options do we really have? Can we really put all our hopes in ourselves or in other human beings, in medicines or technology? Certainly, these have their merits, but they also have their limitations. And so, our ultimate answer must be found in Jesus Christ. And that's why this miracle story is such a hopeful one for us. Peter never finally failed. For always in the moment of his failure, he clutched at Christ. The wonderful thing about him is that every time he fell, he rose again. And that it must have been true that even his failures brought him closer and closer to Jesus Christ. As has been well said, a saint is not a man who never fails. A saint is a man who gets up and goes on again every time he fails. He falls. Peter's failures only made him love Jesus Christ the more. Another lesson we can learn from this story is that we must continue to focus on Jesus instead of becoming unsettled by circumstances we have never encountered. This is the key for a consistent Christian lifestyle. And for consistency in whatever leadership role we may be given, we can rely on his presence in our lives. You see, the Peter shows us that as long as we keep focused on Jesus, as long as we follow him, look to him, as long as we have even a little faith, we can overcome the doubt and cry out to Jesus, "Save me, Lord," and we can experience a miracle in our lives. Yes, even though we may falter along the way, as did Peter, when we turn our eyes to Jesus, trusting him, the seemingly impossible can happen. Christ can help us weather our storms, taking us by our hand and leading us to a place of peace and calm, hope and joy. We just have to stay focused on Jesus with faith and trust. Because you see, faith believes that God in Jesus Christ not only has the power over the storms of nature, but he has power over the storms in our lives as well. Faith believes that he has the power to change circumstances, to change people, to change hearts. As Pastor William Sloane Coffin says, faith must be lived before it can ever be understood. And the more it is lived, the more things become possible. Sinners can become saints. Hate-filled relationships can turn into loving relationships. Cowardice can turn into courage. The fatigue of despair into the buoyancy of hope. In instance, after instance, life after life, I have seen the power of Christ change individuals and circumstances. And that's miracle enough for me. Yes, if we keep our focus and faith on Jesus, his outstretched arms will be there for us to keep us from sinking, from falling. These verses finish with another great and